To be a follower of Christ is to excuse the inexcusable and to forgive the unforgivable, because that is what he has done for you. To be a follower of Christ is to excuse the inexcusable, to forgive the unforgivable, because that is what he has done for you. And so when we sing songs like I've decided to follow Jesus, we're saying I will look at my fellow man and I will excuse the inexcusable things about them. I will forgive the unforgivable things because I know I have received unfailing love, undying devotion, complete fidelity. That now the only logical response, as Paul would say in Romans, is to respond in kind. And by literally being the hands and feet of Christ, meaning literally being the walking out nature of it. And that being said, the walking nature of how Christ lived his life was in a rhythm, fidelity of prayer. There can't be enough said about this idea. If you read the story of Christ, if you haven't, I encourage you to. There's 4 different accounts that we are given. And they all have many, many similarities, but the one thing they have in complete similarity is this. Jesus went and prayed. Then he did. Then he prayed. Then he did. And then he prayed. Prayer was the marker points of everything Jesus did. And that echoes throughout the church ages as well over the centuries. Every time the church has been a moving force of the world like it was intended to be, it has been marked by prayer. It has been marked by a few radical people abandoning everything else and saying that my walk begins in a fidelity, in a rhythm of prayer. In the proper context of prayer being the thing that I'm not trying to get God to change, but I'm trying to let God change me. And it all comes to me to very simple culmination when David writes, search me and try me. See if there's any wicked way in me. Search me. What is that saying? It's saying, God, my prayer is not for you to go intervene in the world out there, but to intervene in my soul in here. And the unreachable parts that nothing else can quite get to, I ask that you come in and search this out and shift and change this, because in so doing, it begins to change the world around me. And there's a lot to be said about seeking and searching. And that's what we're going to talk about here for a moment. But I'd like to pray one more time, or 2 or 3. And uncover just a little bit more about how prayer for us has been twisted inadvertently or purposefully. I don't really care the mannerism that it happened, but that it has, and we need to shift it back. Let's pray together again. Father, we're here and we ask that our hearts and ears are open, that we hear and do, that this word that we are hearing, this message, is not just words from my mouth, but it is words from yours. They're not just a message teaching us how to change an action, but they are living water that renews our spirit and that shifts the very trajectory of our lives, of our rhythms. We begin to think in the terms you think. We begin to walk in the ways that you walk. In your name, and everybody said, amen. So we're going to talk for a little bit and meditate on this idea of seeking and searching. And it's all throughout the Bible, from the Old to the New Testament. And it's all in a prayerful form. It's all mentioned around prayer and about really worship in general. The construct of worship is a seeking, a searching. But as it is, we can only pull from experiences that we have in our lives. Yes, that's the only way we can describe anything. For instance, if I was trying to describe to you what a plantain was, does anybody know what a plantain is? Do you remember the first time someone told you about a plantain? They said it's like a giant banana. And so you're thinking, giant banana. And then they tell you that they put salt on it and they fry it, and you're like, wait, what? You're doing what to a banana? Yeah, it's like a potato. I thought you said it was like a banana because bananas and potatoes are nothing alike. And what they had to do was pull from things they understood and know, and so by doing so, it missed the point, right? So by saying big banana, it gave you one concept. It gave you the shape of what a plantain looks like. A big banana. But that example completely missed and completely led you in a wrong direction with the other side of the analogy, because now you're thinking a sweet, savory banana. And plantains are not particularly sweet like that. So then there's another analogy. Well, like a potato. But the analogy of a potato gets closer to the flavor of it, but then misses the visual shape of it. And this is how we describe everything in our world. This is how we describe everything about God, using analogy to try to bring into view a portion. But by doing so, it now gives us a little bit of a false view over here, and we have to use another one to fill that in. Does this make sense? And so when we think of prayer and we use terms like talking with God, it gives us the understanding and idea of communicating with him. But on the other hand, over here, it leads us in the wrong direction of thinking it's going to come across like a verbal conversation we currently have. And so then we try to reframe it up maybe a little bit different, and we give a new example of it's like seeking and searching for God, and he responds to you, and it's not like a literal talking to you, and we try to use another example. It's like you're searching for, and he finds, but then that ends up leading us down another thing, because the only things that we search for are hidden things. And so it leads us slightly astray, thinking that God has somehow tried to hide himself and make himself quite obscure in the world. This is one of the biggest arguments of non-believers, actually, is if God is everything you say he is, then where is he? Why don't we see him and experience him? Why is he seemingly completely disassociated from our world? And it's because of the way that we have framed it up with an analogy. And I use this analogy again. We just spoke about this not too long ago. The idea of a painting. You don't expect to find the actual painter in the painting, but the expression of. And so then you begin to find a signature. And so every example we use inevitably will do this. And what we need to make sure we don't do is hold on to analogy more than we hold on to the meaning behind the analogy. And it works this way for a seeking and a searching. Because see, when I say seeking, most of you think of childhood hide and go seek. Who's ever played hide and go seek? One of my favorite games to play as a kid, wasn't it yours? Did anyone ever go hide and you hid too well and you just got bored? And you're like, I'm just going to go somewhere else because apparently no one can find me. Now, I was the youngest, so my brother and older cousins would say we're going to play hide and seek. I'd go hide, and they quit playing the game and went inside and just left me outside to me and my other little cousins. So I just gave someone an idea with their little brothers and sisters. But when I say seeking and searching and that, you tend to think something like that. That means that something has been hidden. And usually you think like hide and seek, it's been hidden purposefully. But I would like to submit to you that that analogy of you thinking hide and seek puts it as if God has somehow purposefully hidden himself. And what you need to more think of it is like this. This morning, I went into my son Levi's room because he did not wake up by his alarm. And I very rarely venture into the unknown. But I did. His door was cracked open. I heard their alarms going off quite early, and they did not wake up. And so I went up to his room, and I tried to open the door. And in so doing, it hit an entire laundry basket of clothes. And as I peered around the door and looked, I'm not sure that if I was looking for the carpet, I could have found it. Clothes littered everywhere. And so I told him to wake up, and he woke up. But if I had said, Levi, Mimi is telling me that there is some socks that have been divorced from their other sock. She's got a bunch of single socks, and socks come in pairs. Unless you're a pirate, you need 2 socks. Levi, go seek and find the other sock. Was the sock hidden purposefully, or was it just buried under a mountain of other things that were deemed as more important? And you need to think of this in your life, in prayer, and your relationship with God. Your spiritual walk of life is much like a messy teenager room in which you perceive that you're having to seek God because he's played in hide and seek with you, but in all actuality, he's right there where you left him the last time. It's right there, but through the busyness of life and the hurry and the wanting to go swimming as Levi was and the wanting to go play music, you just threw off these things and threw them on the ground, and before you knew it, you can't find the things that used to be important to you because you've covered them up, not purposefully, but just pure neglect. And that's why we have to seek and search. And Jesus gives us a promise in the Gospels when he's talking about this idea of seeking and searching. He says, if you seek, you will find. What does that tell us? Because that's not how the game of hide and seek works, right? You're not guaranteed to find, are you? Not unless you just have friends, that think they're still 2 and they're like, I'm hiding from you. No, see, when we think seeking, we think hidden on purpose, thus I'm not guaranteed to find. But Jesus flips that whole analogy on its head and says, no, you seek and you will find. There's a guarantee on the other side of it. And that seeking looks something more akin to us diving in to the mess of our spiritual walks and thoughts and lives and finding what was once there and understanding it didn't hide itself. The keys do not grow legs and run off. You forget where you put them. And this is the understanding of seeking. And then there's the other idea that was like the searching. Is seeking and searching the same? Very, very, very similar. They're almost identical. Seeking carries with it more the idea of going somewhere. Like I'm going after something. Searching has more of the idea of I'm in a place and I'm trying to uncover something. See, the reason that the idea of seeking slightly misses it is because you think that God is a distance from you. You think he has purposely hidden himself, and thus you must travel great distances and go and have a grand adventure to try to uncover where he is. And that's slightly off. Whereas to search is, yes, there's a movement, but it's not so much a going as if I'm searching in like this bookshelf or in the couch cushions and finding all kinds of things I didn't know were there in the first place. But for that thing. Because the core character of God is this. We call them the 3 omnis. Omnipresent, omniscient, all-knowing, and all-powerful. So all the power at all times and every time, and all the knowledge at all times and every time. So thus God can be no more distant from you in this very moment that I'm speaking to you right now, and in the moment that preceded when you were asleep, and in the moment that will come after. So think about right now in your mind, if you can, the moment of your greatest distress in life. That's usually not very hard for us. We're really good at finding those moments of trauma. Think about that moment. And now think about the moment of pure elation that you've ever felt, whether it be in the presence of God or just pure fun, hanging out, fun in the Sunday, whatever it is. And understand that in both of those moments, God was no more present or distant at all. There was no difference for him. The difference is in you, is in me, is in our searching and seeking. But then there's an interesting thing that Jesus even does that we're about to look at, which is he flips the scripts and says, not only are you going to seek and find, but also God is in this seeking as well. So that would be like a game of hide and seek in which no one's hiding and everybody's looking for the other person. If someone's thinking about how would that game work, it wouldn't. It'd be everybody in front of each other. Do you get the picture? That flip-flop of saying you seek and search and asking God to seek and search because he's seeking and searching you out. You're trying to seek and search him out. And guess what happens? He's always found. But we tend to play the hiding part. It expresses itself in many, many ways. One of them is shame. Prayer is the way that we uncover that. Prayer is the method that we begin to seek and remove the hiding part of our part and allow God to begin to seek and to remove all of the chaos that we have created in our bedroom to find the missing sock or to find the keys, the thing that was initially valuable. Do you get what I'm saying? Prayer is the searching and the seeking. But we have a problem with our view of prayer and offering, sacrifice, all of these things. And what it is paganism. Wait, how does that fit into this, Jared? Where are you going with this? Listen closely. There's typically always viewed, there's two types of worship for every religion. There's their version of worship, which is proper, and then anything else, usually considered pagan. So think of it this way. What you call pagan worship, someone else calls true worship, and they call what you're doing pagan worship. You get how that works? So when we say pagan, we mean any kind of worship outside of the scope of worshiping the one true God. But yet someone who worships some other deity would then say, your worship is pagan, and they're worshiping the true God. Do you see how this works? Now, all of this is based off the premise that we discussed earlier, which is what? There is one God, all of that. So I'm working as if you believe that to be true. I believe there's sufficient evidence that that is true. Physical, scientific, philosophical, you being the best example of all, is the nature of man is the biggest pointer to that there is a God and that we can commune with him, that there ever has been and ever will be. He made it that way because in Genesis we were made in his image and likeness, yes? This should be review. It wasn't that long ago, guys. But here's what's happened to our prayer. Remember prayer, our fidelity, our rhythm. Prayer is our connection, communication that changes in here to create the out there. All of that. Yes, everybody remember that? What has happened to that, it has been paganized, meaning we have taken true form and we have shifted it. And here's how. And this has started in the ancient days, so let me break this down for you, a little history lesson. Who likes history? Well, for those of you who don't, you're going to be bored for a second. Well, here, I'll shrink it down a little bit. So in ancient times, during the time of the Hebrew people and the early church, there was what was typically called pagan worship. And pagan worship kind of became its own little thing, like not like just pagan all worship, but there was like this whole worship sect that is generally still to this day referred to as pagan worship. And it came from the Greeks and the Romans. Who knows anything about Greek mythology and things? Just you've heard of it. Apollo, Zeus, yeah, okay? So here's how pretty much every other belief system of worship and pagan worship happened. What prayer was for them is this right here. There is God or the gods, and I serve the one that is going to currently be the most powerful, or I deem the most powerful, or the most protecting of me, or my people. and I serve that God, and what that God requires of my service is that I bring an offering or sacrifice of some kind to an altar of some kind, and in so doing, this sacrifice or this offering, what I have done now is the God or gods that I am serving now, because my offering was given, I've basically put a coin in, and some of them literally did do coin things and stuff like that. And by so doing, now this God or gods will listen to my prayer based off of how good my offering was, and will do whatever it is I'm asking them to do. This is how all sacrifices pretty much unilaterally across pagan worship worked. If my offering was sufficient, it didn't really matter what I was asking, so long as my offering was sufficient. And then the God or gods would begrudgingly, even if they didn't want to, have to answer the prayer, because this was how the barter worked. There's actually a couple really great movies that use, one of them is, I think it's the second one of the Wrath of the Titans. I don't remember what, Clash of Titans, Wrath of Titans, whichever one it was. And what happens is in one of the exchanges, because the offering was done in the manner it had to be done in, the God begrudgingly had to still answer the request because the sacrifice was met. This is pagan worship. Now you may say, well, Jared, that sounds very similar to Jewish worship. They sacrificed. They did in the temple. They sacrificed lambs and doves and all kinds of things. But it's not even remotely the same. Because here's why. That was pagan worship. Does that sound similar to what you've thought of prayer up till the last month because you've completely changed your entire mindset now? That was a hopeful, wishful thinking that you have? Because what I just described is exactly how you've been taught and framed up prayer, isn't it? Pagan. I have met a sacrificial something. I've prayed long enough, hard enough, with enough people. There was a threshold I had to hit, and I hit it. My knees are bleeding because I bowed enough. I don't care. Whatever the threshold was, you were behaving well enough so then he would listen. And the exchange was you somehow acted well enough or something, gave enough, whatever it was, that now God will listen to you and do whatever you ask. And that is pagan worship. But see, that was nothing about sacred worship, sacred prayer, sacred sacrifice. That was never the concept. See, what we've missed is the whole purpose of sacrifice and offering in the sacred faith and in Judaism. It was not a sacrifice or offering to get God to listen. It was a forgiveness sacrifice. The sacrifices in and of themselves were intended from a place of asking for forgiveness and knowing that there's needed to be something done about the infraction from humanity. And so the offering and sacrifice was asking for forgiveness. And then inquiring of God after that, what must I do about it? Do I need to say that again? Is that a little thick for an afternoon after you're about to go to sleep from lunch? Let me say that again. Pagan worship was sacrifice or offering that now the deity, and I'm saying it like that because they worship many deities, would now listen to anything I asked because I met the requirement, and I get to give my requirement to the deity. So for you, it'd be give it to God. I have done the thing. Now I give my requirement of God to me. As we talked about just recently, God, shema me. Hear and do what I'm saying because I've met the threshold. But sacred worship, sacred sacrifice, sacred offering was the idea that I am trying to approach God because I recognize that there's been an infraction from humanity and I'm not exactly sure how to reapproach this. And so I'm sacrificing or I'm offering to bridge the gap and gain forgiveness. That is all I'm asking for the infraction that was done by humanity. All the way dating back to Adam and Eve for the Jewish people. And then in so doing that and asking for that forgiveness, the next thing was to inquire of God what can be done to resolve this situation. Do you see the vast difference? If not, you will. The first thing you need to see between this difference of how our prayer has been paganized is you are now the one requiring of God instead of the one inquiring of God. There's a vast difference of requiring of someone and inquiring of someone. Because if I'm requiring of someone, I am asking and needing, and they must do something for me. But if I'm inquiring, I want to know something about, and I'm trying to understand something. Do you see the difference? And so we have twisted prayer into a requiring of God. We've taken the idea of petitioning. That's what the word prayer commonly translates to, is petitioning God. And we've taken that and said petition means to require something from God, but it means to petition more like an inquiry. If I need to understand. And the question for ancient man and in the Psalms is basically this in modern tongue. There's a problem with humanity. We have betrayed and we are distant and we need forgiveness. What can we do about this? And that was Jewish sacrifice. Trying to atone, and it's a complete reversal of pagan worship. Pagan worship was requiring of the God to come do for me, and sacred worship was I am inquiring because I need to understand, I need to gain forgiveness. What I need from you is nothing more than to be back in covenant. That was something the Jewish people understood very, very well. Now, over the course of this week, we're going to uncover a whole lot about this. So hopefully that's got your gears just a whipping and a turning. Now, God flips this entire thing on its head. Y'all with me? Oh, you already had too much Jesus for a day? He turns this whole thing on its head because his answer of the sacrifice, the answer to that petition is not just here's what you must do. The answer was here's what I'm going to do about it. And we call his name Jesus. That was the answer. And Jesus comes and reveals to us the fullness of the infraction and pulling it together and showing us the completion. And you may ask, Jared, how does this work? We're going to look at a story in just a moment, but we're going off the cuff here because I'm about to connect some things for somebody. Because what I'm describing here in between is a vast period of time of all this sacrificial worship that we just discussed, right? The pagan and the sacred. In this time, a guy named Moses comes into the picture and he gives something called the Torah or the law, which at current stands somewhere around 600 and something rules. Couldn't even tell you all of them if I needed to. They start with something you know called the Ten Commandments. And he gives this law, and it grows and grows and grows to 613, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't know how many there are now, of all these rules and laws. And if you think of it this way, then Jesus comes along and says, yeah, that's not going to get you all the way there. And if you can think of it this way, the law was intended to be like a magnifying glass of hopefully showing and illustrating to humanity, here's the problem with humanity. And to properly work this out and walk this out, it gave mankind the ability, the law gave mankind the ability to observe and see the problem and see that there needs to be a solution. And what Christ did was gave the Spirit that then gave you the ability to overcome that problem and solution. Now that Spirit and ability was always there, but had never been walked out properly. That is why Jesus is referred to as the last Adam. Pray do tell why. Number one, creation. You're created normally. None of you are the Immaculate Conception. You were created by a man and a woman. Adam was not. Adam was created by God from the dust of the ground. Yes, Jesus was created by God through Mary, the only two created that way in our entire story of every man, woman, and child in the entire universe. Why? Adam is your picture of failure and what you do when you do not listen, which causes the unforgiveness needed. Jesus is the full picture of what it looks like when that very spiritual nature that you are, and you are put upright with spirit first and natural underneath, there's what it looks like. And what does Jesus say? Follow me. Follow in this way. Which is the answer to the problem. What was the main way that Jesus begins to show this? Prayer. Now, in a minute, we're going to see what kind of prayer he does. Oh, you're all familiar with it. But we like to mumble over the part that he was quite emphatic about. Let's see something that he does say about this idea, though, of seeking and searching and God seeking and searching. Let's go to John 4. John 4 is a story commonly referred to as the woman at the well. They've even made TV shows depicting this very scene. And I'm going to kind of just paraphrase the majority of the story for you and get you kind of understanding what's happening. And we're going to read just one little piece. But the story goes like this, that Jesus is leaving one area because basically the Pharisees are coming after him. He's like, yeah, not going to die yet. So he moves on. In his process of moving on, he goes to this place called Jacob's Well. And as he is there, he meets a woman. And this woman is like we are spiritually. I promise I wouldn't call anybody names this week, so I'll let you draw that conclusion. She can't get water at normal times of the day because she's a pariah of society, because she's been quite unfaithful. 5 by Jesus' account. And as they are there talking, Jesus is trying to explain to her, they're at a well. Jesus has no way to get water out of it. He's like, hey, will you get me some water to drink? And she's like, you didn't bring anything to get some water out of it? He's like, but if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for a drink. She's like, you ain't got nothing to get a drink. You just asked me for water, you crazy man. I love how Jesus is always he never answers anything right. He's like, think about it. Like, engage the senses that God gave you. That's how Jesus responds to everything. Every gospel does it this way, by the way. So it's not like one guy portrays Jesus to be this way. So apparently, Jesus just loved riddles because he always answered like that. He never once said, they're like, so tell us the answer to this. He's like, okay, it's A. This one's C, and this one's D, all the above. He's always like, let me ask you a question. And so he's like, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for water and you'd never get thirsty again. And she kind of, I like the way that I've seen it portrayed, where she's kind of almost in a sense mocking him and saying, oh yeah, all right, well tell me where this water is, crazy person. And they kind of have this back and forth. And it comes to the point where Jesus is saying, yeah, I'm the Messiah. I'm the one that you're supposed to be following, the one that's going to say all of this. That's me. And how he gets her convinced of this is tells her things no one else could ever know about her 5 husbands. Because Jesus says, I'm going to tell you the answer. Go get your husband. She's like, I don't have a husband. He's like, yeah, you're right, you don't. And the person you're with ain't even your husband. You've been with 5 dudes. Do you see what I'm talking about? Not a lot of fidelity going on there. And in this story, as she's there, she finally starts and she says, oh, well, they say worship on this mountain. We say worship over here. Talking about placement of where you're going to worship and all this different stuff. When the Messiah comes, we'll fully understand. And he's like, it's here and it's now. And this is his response when he's having this whole conversation. This is how, think about this for a minute, all right? Don't get caught, like the story's great, but what Jesus says in response is the thing that should start to rattle us a little bit. And the reason it doesn't is because, A, you've either been churched and you've heard this story a whole bunch and you don't think of God two licks of this story. You focus on the woman, you focus on what happened after, you don't focus on what Jesus is portraying and showing us about the heart of God right here. He exposes it, just clear as day. And most of us just read it and say like, whoo, and we just go on. And we don't stop and think the whole purpose of Jesus' interaction was to show her the heart of God through his life and then say, now go and sin no more. Go and don't miss the mark anymore. Go and have fidelity in your natural life and your spiritual one. And he uncovers the heart of God right here. And and here's where he does it. In verse 21, Jesus responds to her and say, woman, believe me, the hour is coming, meaning the time is come. Did y'all hear that though? That's the first thing we need to understand. See, y'all thought we were going to read like a whole verse? No, to uncover the nature of how God looks at things, we have to pay very close attention to how the people who walked with Christ wrote about how he talked. Y'all thinking hide and seek. The hour is coming. There's going to be a time, but notice how it's phrased. The hour is come. When neither you'll worship on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, worship the Father. You worship and you know not what? We know what we worship for salvation of the Jews, but the hour come. And now is. Look, he said it 3 times now. First he says the hour come, then he explains. Then he says the hour's come, and it's now. Just in case you wanted to misinterpret this idea of you seek and then someday you find, he's saying no, it's now. That's the first thing you need to understand about the heart of God. Why? Because he's ever present. So he's no more close to you right now than he was in that time of stress and distress and all of your trauma and all your negative and all of your good. He was no more there or there. He was equally always. And is always ready for us. Let's see why. And the hour is now when true worshipers. Now, if you're not aware real quick, by adding the term true worshiper, that also implies what? That there's false worship. So if there's true, there's false. I wonder what true worship looks like and false worship looks like. Well, I just described to you one version of it with prayer from the pagan idea and the sacred idea. But let's look at how he defines it, because that would probably be a good idea, don't you think? I think so. When true worshipers will worship the Father. Okay, here's the definition of what true worship is. In spirit and truth, and the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Then the lady responds like, well, when the Messiah comes, we'll understand all of this stuff. And he's like, yeah, that's me, bro. But do you see right here how he uncovers the very heart of God? First off, he uncovers that the time is always, never distant, never more present now than he was in the past. The second thing that he uncovers is a heart that is seeking and trying to search you out for true worship, for deep, meaningful fidelity. And he says it's got to be in spirit and truth. Now, there's a lot that can be said about this idea of spirit and truth, but we're going to say a little bit. The first thing you need to understand is about the word spirit. The word spirit here is the word pneuma in Greek, which is where you get the word pneumonia, meaning of a breath. Then that specifically means spirit like breath, life. It also could mean speech, but primarily here it means like life. And the word truth here means that which is considered true under any circumstance. So I need you to frame that up for a minute. God's heart is an always now seeking, trying to find someone that in life and breath and everything about them will choose him, and in truth, which means no matter what the circumstance may be. But I love the way it's phrased because it says, that is which is considered true. Right, Ariel? What you consider to be true. Now, I know some of you have had conversations with people that think they know what the truth of a matter is, and you know for a solid fact they are wrong. I'm going to pick on Levi some more since Jade's out of town. It's not fair to talk about someone behind their back. Levi considers a great many things to be true, no matter what you tell him. Considers them to be true that he will argue with you tooth and nail. And I've listened to him and his mother in the kitchen about loading dishes, how he thinks he's got such a more efficient way to do these dishes. And he will describe what he considers to be true. And sometimes Taryn forces him. And then sometimes she's like, fine, just keep doing it over and over again. But until I come back and it looks this way, you can think that's the right way all you want. And I'm going to make you keep doing it over and over and over again until it looks right. Some of y'all are like, man, I'm glad I'm not Taryn's kids. And I've watched her do it. I've watched my kids sweep and mop the floor like 6 times in a day because they did not do it right the first time and they would not listen to her instructions. Some of y'all need to hear yourselves in the spirit. That is you. But let's look at this. That is which is considered true. So it's almost like what Jesus is invoking here is the very heart of God that says, I'm ever present, always here, and it's now. I'm readily available, and I'm looking. I want someone that is willing to worship, which means to bow or to submit or to humble themselves. It's almost like there's something that needs to be put under something else. That would be called the spirit over the natural. He says, I'm looking for someone that in this life will do this. And will do this no matter what the circumstance is because they have considered worshiping God to be truth. So no matter what circumstance, I've decided, you would say. Also invoking back our image and likeness of God to make a decision to do. Now, there's something else that's by absence, Jesus is kind of begging the question here. Which he did not say, true worshipers who worship the Father in spirit and in truth and are the picture-perfect perception of what following God looks like. Did you see that in there? It's noticeably absent. The only things that it says that the heart of the Father is looking for is someone that will do it in the very breath and life of who they are and consider it to be true at all times. He made no mention of how well you do that. Do you see this? Now you may be saying, but Jared, you've taught us all about the idea of how what's in you ends your action, so I'm not doing well at it. Yes, but what does he say start to do well at? Your fidelity. And what does Christ show us that looks like? Through prayer. Because he says if that's the thing that you'll worship with the very breath and life that you have, if that's the place you stay, watch what those things become. He says that's what the heart of the Father is looking for, pleading for. And where does this begin? It begins and ends in prayer. And the life of Christ shows us this. The life of Christ shows us how it begins and ends in prayer, because if he is the example and that's who you've decided under any circumstance to follow, he is constantly doing what? Praying with fidelity and rhythm, and then doing, and then praying and doing, and he's hearing and doing. Yeah, Jesus shamad. It says the heart of the Father is seeking that. And what do we see in the Psalm of David? He says, now you, God, search me, try me. You found me, I found you. We weren't playing hide and seek. We were both seeking. Now, I want you to seek in me. How do we allow God to seek and search us out? I'll give you one guess. Again, it's a word that starts with a P and ends with an R. In prayer. Do you see why it is so important that you wipe your dumb blank definition of prayer being the paganistic form of I am going to God and requiring of him, because none of this works if that's what you think prayer is. Because prayer cannot be fidelity. Prayer cannot be relationship. Prayer cannot be worshiping God in spirit and in truth. All it can be is me asking and begging God to do things and he doesn't respond the way I want him to. Do you see? That's why it goes all the way back to the first thing we've ever talked about in week 1 about prayer being fidelity. Because if it is not framed up in that manner, you will never understand what relationship, you'll never understand what it means to follow Christ. It will all be a blur and not make any sense to you whatsoever. And you'll look like everyone else looks in the modern church today, which is claiming a fidelity and a following of Christ, but looks nothing like him. And it's not because, oh, we're so horrible and we can never measure up. It's because there is no prayer fidelity in our lives. And so it never reflects what we're supposed to look like. And so then we start making the claims about perfection and how good we are at it, all the while missing the only thing he asked from us was fidelity in spirit and truth. I submit to you, and I'm not picking on any one person or named people that are popular or anything like that. This is how in the modern church we're getting stories from great mega pastors to people who are just well known in the faith, and they can pour over the text in the scripture and they're defining every Hebrew and Greek word and can tell you all about how science, logic, and reason, and they can make sense of God in all kinds of realms. And then it's like, wait, he was doing what with his wife and doing what? What was happening? With that high-pitched of a voice. Come on. Tell the truth, shame the devil. That's what we do. And we look at that and we're baffled by it, aren't we? We're like, oh, how? Because it's a personal fidelity. That's not saying if you do that, you'll never mess up and fail. No, that's Christ is there to make up the difference. But the second you start bringing that conversation in is the second you start down the path that prayer becomes something different. A seeking and a searching. Now let's look back at Psalms 139 real quick. I want to define something that blew my mind. I know this one's a little bit more of a directness and a looking and a describing of Scripture. So maybe a little bit more, I'm not giving you a little bit of a baby bottle today. You're graduating a little bit. We're diving into it. So it's all right. Your teeth have came in, I promise you. You can chew this. This is something that is not hidden, and I need to make that explicitly clear for people who think there's a hiding and a seeking going on. Christ has revealed the fullness. There's nothing that God is hiding from us. So what I'm about to share with you is not secret hidden knowledge. It is easily well-known knowledge. The only reason we may not get it is of our own personal diligence and just general language barriers. Is that clear? I just want to make sure this is not, the word for it is Gnosticism. This is not hidden knowledge or esoteric knowledge in any way. This is just something that we've overlooked. That's why we must meditate on it day and night, and then we can be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth our fruit in our season. Then your leaves won't wither, and whatever you do will prosper. Kind of like in James chapter 2 and chapter 1, it talks about his deeds will be blessed. What deeds? The deeds of meditating on the law. So when we meditate on Scripture, and specifically like Psalms, to let it become our prayerful fidelity, it begins to reveal to us. Are you following me? Psalms 139, verse 23 and 24, we just read it. Let's read it again. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. And see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. First off, let's break up the parts that we do know. Okay, well, search me. Got that? What part of searching me are we talking about? The inner parts of me. How, pray, does he do that? Prayer. And know my heart. I would like to phrase it like this. This analogy, again, sometimes misses the point, but this one does not. God is a gentleman. He ain't gonna sit there, even though he knows your heart. He's not going to know you in the manner that this is referring to. This idea of know is not like to know of. Like, for instance, you guys all know of the English language, but very few of us know the English language. That can tell you why. All we know, I before E except after C, and sometimes Y. Is that right? Okay. We couldn't tell you. I mean, my wife was explaining to me the other day because I was like, yes, that's right. And she's like, no, it's and, but it doesn't sound right. It doesn't matter. It's a vowel after the thing, so you have to put an in so there's not two vowels next to each other. I'm like, that's a rule? So we don't know. We don't know all of the facets and forms of how it works. All of you know me in one degree or another, but you don't know me like my wife knows me. Yes? So this knowing is not like, well, God's omniscient. You said it, Jared. He knows everything. It's like, yeah, he knows everything. But he says, what I want to do is I want a willingness of a relationship. How does that formed? I'm going to point you back to one thing and one thing alone, everybody. It is called prayer. So he says, search me. Know my heart. I'm going to open it up to you in prayer. Try me. That means like test me. Investigate. And know my thoughts. Wow. All right, come on. Who's in a serious relationship or has ever been in one? Okay. Sorry, I got to fix my mic. It's like pulling my head off. There we go. Okay. Imagine saying, I'm going to have such a deep, meaningful relationship with you, honey. They've got this new technology. And what it does is I put a little note on my head and you put a little note on your head and everything I think just goes to you. You get to know all of it. Who would be scared as all get out? You should be, because I would be, because the jokes that my wife makes about killing me, I would see the actual plan of how that may happen someday. That would be insane. And that's the prayer. That's the level of depth and fidelity that David's talking about. He's like, this is what it means for spirit and truth, is to go down to the depths of saying, every thought that I have, God, I know you know, but like, I'm willing to tell you. That's crazy. You know, you can only do that with somebody. You could only be that open and honest if you knew that person wasn't going anywhere. Right? How many of you, come on, tell the truth. Y'all aren't good at this, telling the truth thing. How many of you, your best friend, spouse, whatever it is, the person you're closest to, you would be afraid that you would lose them as a friend or something if they knew everything you've ever thought about them or just in general? They would look at you in pure disgust on some of the things. Yeah. So the only way you could do that, if there was some level of fidelity from the other end that you knew would not fail. And that has to do with knowing the heart of God. David understood something about the heart of God, about God's relentless, unfailing love, care, and devotion. This came to me in my conversation with two of my kids. And I'm going to say it this way, and it may not fully make sense to you, but I'm going to pull a Jesus. Go and see what this means. God has made his judgment on humanity already. And his judgment on humanity was, humanity is worthy of eternity. The only difference is he's saying, now it's up to you to decide if you are. He's saying, I have passed my judgment on all of humanity, and I say you're worthy of eternity with me, but it's up to you to decide if you think you're worthy of it. You may say, well, what? Go see what this means. And that's what David understood. He's like, there's nothing. I mean, you read these Psalms, like I said, David was a wicked dude, man. And he wrote all of his thoughts for the entire world, for all generations to see some of his thoughts. You read some of this stuff, you read some of his stories, you're like, oh, and we get very self-righteous in that moment. I would never. It's like, yeah, but you thought about it too. You just ain't got the balls to sit there and write it and say, yeah. He did. Why? Because he's like, I don't care about any of what y'all think of me, because I know. And thus we get the example of he was what? After God's own heart. Not after like just like it, after like seeking. Constantly wanting more of it. And this prayer is the culmination of that. Could you imagine that? That kind of relationship with someone. And that's the type of relationship God has already promised us. He is only waiting on our response to it. So we must look at prayer like this. You ready? Write this down. We are not praying and bringing before God what ought to be in us. The fidelity. That's not how we're praying, from a place of what is in us, which may be jacked up from the floor up. But he says, what you do is, if you know me, you know I'm not going anywhere. Worship me in spirit and in truth, all of the depth of it, all of it. And you don't bring me what you ought to be. And you don't bring me all of the false emptiness, where you're saying the words and you're trying to present yourself to me as you got it all put together. Someone who really knows me says they bring the whole mess and they drag it in there and lay before God what is in them, not what ought to be, and say, can you exchange this for what ought to be? That's what prayer is. That's the fidelity that I'm talking about. And that's how you have scripture after scripture that says, I come boldly before the throne of what? Of vengeance and hellfire. No, of grace and mercy, because I can bring before God what is, and he will search and try it, and then put me in a state of what ought. But actually the crazy thing is, he says, what in your process of doing that, you're putting yourself in that state already. And look, Jesus was the exact example. I got real excited and ran out of breath all at the same time. And my voice is going out. Are y'all getting this? It's simple, but profound. And it shifts the entire nature of your world. And if it's not shifting it, it's because you already understand it, oh, mature one. Or because you ain't listening to a daggum word I'm saying. It's not rattling you to your core that this is the nature of God. And here we are learning it from someone who we would call a backwoods desert dweller. And then he says this other thing. This is crazy. This is the part that I said just was like, whoa, what? See if there is any wicked way in me. And the word wicked here that is used is only used 4 times in the Bible. 4 times. Oddly enough, it is used 4 times and translated as 4 different English words. So same word in Hebrew, used 4 times, and every time it comes across, it's translated in a different way. Does that make sense? So you have a word, and when you read it, the word we read right here is wicked. I don't really exactly know how to pronounce this word in Hebrew, but I'm going to say O-S-apostrophe-E-B letter. I don't know what that letter is, honestly. Obesity. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. And it comes across in Chronicles, Psalms, Isaiah twice. And here it is. You ready? You read it as wicked in this moment, but in the other ones, it comes across as sorrow, depression, depending on which translation you're reading, and idol. Wait, what? What? I-D-O-L. Idol, like a worshiping idol, one fashioned out of gold or something of that nature. Not like a car being idle, although that could play, but no, that's not what it means. It means this. So we have this word that he uses right here that means like sorrow, depression, or a crafted idol. And I was reading that and I was like, wait, what? So everywhere else you see wicked in the Old Testament, it's a different word. That typically means twisted or not of God. It means something else. But this one directly translates to the idea of a sorrow or a pain, something like that, and a crafted idol. Now, I don't know about you, but I get perplexed by hearing that. Because I don't know exactly what to make of that. Do you? Because I see no way that pain and sorrow and then crafting an idol over here go together, except for it does when you look at the details of the word. The core of the word means like pain and sorrow, and the other side of it means like making an idol. So it's making an idol of something. What is that something you're making an idol of? Pray do tell. Your pain and sorrow. Holy crap. Search me, try me, God. Know my hearts and my thoughts. I lay it all out there, not what ought to be, but what is. And see if there is any idols and things that I'm worshiping above you of my own pain and my own sorry, self-loathing. And lead me in your everlasting way. Lead me out of that crap and back into your way. And then it got me to thinking, which sometimes is good. Where does the truest form of pain and sorrow in our lives come from? From other people, doesn't it? I mean, anything that you physically get hurt by, it tends to heal. Maybe you favor it, but it's not the thing that you wake up in the morning and never want to get out of bed. Even people who have had situations that are like chronic illnesses, everyone will even tell you the primary thing that causes the depression and sorrow is not the actual ailment. It's the situations that it has put them in and the way that people are reacting to it. I'll use an example, and Mimi, I don't mean to be indelicate, but my great-grandfather, Mimi's dad, he was a pretty healthy guy, pretty healthy dude. And he was, well, I don't know, late 80s and wanting to weld all the time in the middle of the heat. And the second that he was told, you're too weak and sick to do any of those things, and all those things were removed from him in a matter of a year, decay, everything settled in. So was it the physical ailment that was the problem? Or was it, where does true sorrow and things come from then? So from other people. It's not really the physical hurts, it's from other people. And what is it about the other people? It's not really in so much what they did to you. It's you constantly thinking, back through it and over and over and over and over again that begins to hurt you even more. And all you're really wanting is them to typically apologize, change, right? And so what actually starts to grip you in your pain and your sorrow and all this kind of stuff is a self-loathing that you've made an idol. And it's actually because you won't forgive. It actually absolutely has nothing to do with what the other person did. It has everything to do with where you are. Thus intro the most life-transforming prayer that we have made the dullest, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and what? Forgive us as we forgive those. Have you noticed something already? We haven't even finished the prayer yet, but the entire prayer is a response prayer. The whole thing is a prayer from the aspect of who God is, so what I must do in return. The whole prayer. Y'all need to read it? We can read it if you don't believe me. But what's the first thing he does? Our Father who art in heaven, acknowledging who God is. Hallowed be thy name. You're holy. It's just in looking at the fidelity of who God is that then drives Jesus to say what? Your kingdom come. The way you're doing stuff, we want that. That's what we want. That fidelity that we're seeing. We want that to come on earth as it is in heaven. I'm responding to who you are, and that's what I want to see more of. And then so what does he say after that? Give us this day our daily bread. Why? I want to continue in this. So suffice me for a day. Then what does he say? It's all response. Forgive us. Why? Because our response of that forgiveness is we're going to forgive. Forgive us debts. We'll forgive. The whole prayer is a response prayer to the already illustrated and known fidelity of God. And it all came from a place of prayer, of knowing the heart of God and bringing to God what is in me, no matter how ugly it may be, and saying, now, search me, try me. Because all I want is you. And I'm willing to lay down these idols that I've made of my own life, search it, find it, see what they are, show them to me, and show me what ought to be in place. Which is why the entire book of Psalms, if you want to read it cover to cover, which I know y'all are thinking, it's in the Bible, the whole Bible. It's one book. Well, technically it's 5, but read the whole thing, and you will see that they purposefully put it this way. It starts off with lament and sorrow, and in the middle, it starts to transform. And then by the end, the whole thing is saying, nope, this is what is. And it starts off saying, God, why? Come and do, and da-da-da-da, and it's all pain and sorrow. And it says, but you're holy, And then in the middle of it, it starts to say, oh, God, why? No, but you're holy. It's like there's this battle happening to say, no, I'm going to bring what is and let you exchange it for what ought. And then by the end of it, the whole thing is saying, I don't really give a flying flip about any of that anymore. Because prayer does what? It doesn't ask God to change out there in the world. It changes me in here, and I become the change in the world, which is also in the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done. How is the will of God going to be done? You and me. How do we do that? We follow Jesus. Well, how do we follow Jesus? To be a Christ follower is to excuse the inexcusable and to forgive the unforgivable, because that's what he's done for us. Which is why in history, Christians have always been marked by the people who would not retaliate. They wouldn't. Matter of fact, there's all kinds of stories of Christians being taken advantage of and being doormats. Matter of fact, some of the greatest Christians that you read and know of today, by our day standards, they've been taken advantage of and made a doormat. Because they said, the level of fidelity and love and forgiveness that I have received from God through Christ, the only thing I can do, I have done this same thing to God. I've made God my doormat. So all I'll do in response, I'll forgive the unforgivable and I'll excuse the inexcusable. But you never get that kind of heart until you start to see the fidelity of God, and the only way you find that is in prayer. But not pagan ritualistic prayer of requiring of God, but sacred prayer of inquiring of God. Laying before God what is, and letting him seek and search to make what ought to be. Prayer becomes making you the answer to your own prayer. The very goodness and things you want to see in the world, you become the very answer to it for someone else, or maybe even the answer to your own prayer. I submit to you this day, brethren and sisterin, that 9 times out of 10, the very thing you want God to do in the world, he's saying, I gave you the power to do it if you'll listen to me. The change you want to see in your family, you be it. I'm going to say it this way just to tick someone off. God's already came in and swooped in and saved the day miraculously through Christ. Was that not enough? I mean, if you think about it, we're constantly asking God to come in and swoop in and save the day, and he's already done it for all of humanity. Forgave the unforgivable, excused the inexcusable, and then we're sitting back and saying, now come do it again, because that wasn't quite enough. Why? Because I don't want to have the one to do that. Do you understand what it would cost me? What it would mean for me? So when we sing a song like, I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, it means the fidelity I've received, the inexcusable things in my thoughts and who I am, I've already been excused for. I've already been forgiven for. So I'll follow Jesus, which means I will be the same and do the same. But it begins and ends with prayer. Prayer is what opens the heart of God and opens your heart to him. But it never will do that if you have it framed up as vending machine in the sky, asking God for things. When prayer becomes a relational, rhythmatic conversation in which I can do like David has done. I can lay before God every single bit of that. And when I say lay before God, that may very well mean sometimes, if you read the beginning of this entire book, where you're virtually yelling and screaming at God. But then in that, you turn around and say, thank you, Adonai, for restoring my soul unto me. You didn't have to, but you did. Endless is your love. Great is your faithfulness. Thank you for the life and the breath that restores my body and spirit. And so I will worship you in spirit and in truth with all of my might, with all of my spirit, with all of my strength, because you've already done that for me. So that's all I can do in response. It begins and ends in that prayer. And so as I look around this room, I see pretty much everyone in the discipleship. We're adding a third prayer rhythm. I will also post a video of this. And the third prayer rhythm we're going to add is an evening prayer. This evening prayer needs to be done at your bed. The very last physical thing you do in this world before you lay down, and God may or may not return your soul unto you. The very last thing you do, whether it's kneeling or sitting in your bed or laying in your bed, but you are in the bed, no TV show. If you're laying in the bed watching TV, it's when you turn off the TV. So don't be doing none of this falling asleep to the TV. You either turn off the TV and pray, or watch TV and stay your butt awake till you pray. Because if your actions reveal what's in you, then making sure that that TV show is the last thing on your mind seems to be more important. Now, I know that hits a little rough and seems condemning. That's not how I mean it. Just go evaluate yourself. In that last prayer, let the most mundane prayer that people have quoted for centuries become again the prayer it was when he told people how to pray the Lord's Prayer. And then guess what the first thing you're going to do when you wake up is? Start it over again. And let that rhythm begin to carry you. And watch boldness with conversation with God come to you. And watch him, yes, bring up the idols and say, hey, this is what we got to deal with. But when it's in view of him and who he is, you say, I'll get rid of that any day. Prayer is the primary facet of our worship. And so I'd like to, I think maybe end and leave today by singing and playing that again that we started with. We mixed up two songs and we'll mix them up again. I like mashups. I'm a DJ with no turntables. We sang, I have decided to follow Jesus. There's no turning back. And we mixed in this other song that says, as long as I have breath, I will praise you, Lord. As long as I can sing, that's what I'm going to be singing. Wherever you lead me, I will follow. I'll let you know one place he's leading you to. Depth of fidelity and rhythm of forgiveness. And just to bring it in one last time for you, also whenever communion comes up, that's why the thing they bring up is unforgiveness in your heart. Because that's like a cancer. And prayer is where the heart of God is revealed. And then the song ends with, as long as I have breath, I will praise you, Lord, which means I will sing and say, and I will put you above everything else. I will be in the right standing of my spirit raises up and my natural comes underneath, and I raise up the spirit and I put down the natural. So there is nothing that I consider as true as the Spirit of God. There's no situation in life that can rise up, that can topple the view and understanding of the Spirit of God. No betrayal, No hurt, no pain, nothing can topple it. It doesn't feel like that, Jared. Nope, it won't. This is the battle of faith. But it's a decision I have made, and I consider it all joy. Because that's my opportunity to prove my fidelity, to prove my prayerful, rhythmatic fidelity.